August 1944, Granville, France. General Eisenhower's sitting there at his desk. It's a heavy oak thing, you know. He's got a report in his hands. From Georgie Patton. Patton, old blood and guts himself. The paper says the Third Army's done it. Says they've closed the gap at Falaise. Victory's ours thanks to the Americans. Patton's writing like he's the only man in France. All confidence, all ego. But Ike's looking out the window. He's got this look on his face. He knows something Georgie's hoping he doesn't. Just hours before, literally just a few hours, the Canadians and those brave Polish boys had already slammed the door shut from the north. They'd been bleeding for 10 days straight. 10 days of absolute hell, facing the toughest krauts left in the country. This wasn't about tanks, not really. It was about who gets the credit. Patton, the most famous face we had, was trying to just, erase a Canadian victory right off the map. He wanted the glory, all of it. Now Ike's got to decide. The timing's it's just awful. The whole war in France is at this tipping point. 80 days since we hit those beaches on June 6th. Long days, hard days. Losing boys for every little hedge and stone barn. But now we've got 100,000 Germans trapped in a pocket, like two giant hands, coming together. Falaise in the north, Argentan in the south, squeezing them. If we lock it tight, the war might end months early. But it's about prestige, too. Who sits at the big table when it's over? Whose names get into the books? The stakes, they were just enormous. 10,000 German trucks and half the Seventh Army sitting there like fish in a barrel. But the cost. God, the cost. The Canadians launched Operation Tractable on the 14th, moving across open dirt against the SS. Those Hitler Youth kids, they fought like demons. Every field became a graveyard. I remember the smoke. Allied bombers, our own planes, dropped their loads right on the Canadian lines. Dust and smoke made it impossible to see your own hand. 400 boys died, from friendly fire before the fight even started. But they kept going. For 6 days, they clawed forward, fired 250,000 shells, lost thousands. On the 16th, they took the town. But the gap, that damn 12-mile gap, stayed open. Germans pouring through like water, saving their skins while our boys bled. Then on the 19th, the Poles. They reached Chamba from the north. The gap's down to 3 miles, 7:20 in the evening. A Polish officer and an American lieutenant finally shake hands in the square. The trap's shut. They did it. 5,000 Canadians dead or wounded. 1,400 Poles, boys who won't ever see home. And now Patton's sitting in his clean uniform, claiming it's all his. Barely mentions the Canadians. Doesn't say a word about the Poles holding Hill 262, surrounded, out of ammo, fighting with knives. Ike's facing a choice. Keep quiet and let the lie become history. Keep Patton happy, or tell the truth and honor the men who actually paid the bill. He's got the maps. He sees the casualty lists. He knows whose blood is in that dirt. Funny how small things stick with you, like the smell of a general's report versus the smell of a wheat field full of dead boys. It's 4:30 in the morning, August 14th, and the world's it's just black. No moon, no stars, just the smell of damp wheat and diesel exhaust. The Canadians call it Operation Tractable. Sounds clinical, doesn't it? Like something a doctor would do. But out there in the dirt, it was anything but. The plan was to use artificial darkness. 720 heavy bombers. Think about that. Droning overhead like a million angry bees. They dropped smoke bombs, not just a few, thousands of them. The idea was to hide the tanks. 400 Canadian Shermans, clanking, groaning, churning up the soil, moving south toward Falaise. Hot, 85 degrees by noon, but even in the pre-dawn, you could feel the sweat itching under your wool tunic. Lice don't care about the heat, they just keep biting. Then, God, I can still hear the screams. The disaster started. The smoke, the very thing meant to save them, became a shroud. The bomber crews up high, they couldn't see a damn thing through the grit and the haze. They got confused, thought the Canadian lines were the German ones, and they let go. The sky just fell on those boys. 400 men, our own guys, wiped out in a heartbeat, blown to bits or burned alive by Allied ordnance. Men who'd survived the beaches, survived the hedgerows, dying because a pilot couldn't see through the dust. It didn't stop the attack, though. It couldn't. You sort of push the bodies aside and keep driving. Those tanks caved through the wheat fields, dust mixing with blood, the metallic taste of fear so thick you could chew it. And waiting for them? Not just regular krauts. The 12th SS, the Hitler Youth. Kids, really. 15, maybe 16 years old. But don't let that fool you. They were fanatical, brainwashed. They didn't know how to surrender, didn't want to. They'd hide in a cellar with a Panzerfaust and wait until the tank was right on top of them. Every farmhouse was a fortress. Every stone wall was a grave. You'd clear a room with a grenade, ears ringing so loud you couldn't hear your own breath. And find a dead boy who looked like he should be back in school, house to house, hand to hand. The Canadians fired 250,000 artillery shells. You know, it's funny how a number like that sounds in a book. But in person, it's a never-ending drumbeat that rattles your teeth. Your ears never stop bleeding. Your hands never stop shaking from the vibration of the earth. On the 16th, they finally get into Falaise. The town's just rubble, dust, and jagged stone. But the gap, that damn hole to the south, it's still 12 miles wide. 12 miles of open air. And the Germans? They're running through it like rats. They're leaving the tanks, leaving the trucks, just running on foot. Every hour that gap stays open, thousands of them slip away to fight us another day. The Canadians are exhausted, spent, but they got to keep pushing. It's only 12 miles, but it's the longest 12 miles in the world. You're out of water. Your rations taste like wet cardboard. The tobacco in your cigarette is so dry it burns your throat like lye. But you look south, and you know if you don't reach those Americans, if you don't close that trap, all those boys who died in the smoke, well, it was all for nothing. Just another day in the meat grinder. Just another field of wheat turned red. A burnt-out Sherman sits in the middle of a road, its turret gone. Just a hollow, smoking metal box in the sun. August 19th, the sun's starting to dip low over a ridge the boys call Mgzuga, the Mace, Hill 262. It's this rugged piece of ground overlooking the whole valley, and if you're standing up there, well, you can see the end of the world coming. General Maczek and his 1st Polish Armored, they were the ones holding the stopper in the bottle. They weren't just fighting for a hill, they were fighting to keep the whole German 7th Army from slipping away. And let me tell you, those Krauts were desperate, like a sort of madness. You had Germans inside the pocket trying to break out, and Germans outside the pocket trying to break in to save them. The Poles were right in the middle, pinched on 3 sides, stuck on that ridge like an island in a sea of gray wool. I remember the sound of the shells, never ending, whistling so close you could feel the wind off them. The dust gets in your teeth, gritty, tastes like old copper. Ammo was running so low, the boys started scavenging from the dead. Didn't matter if it was German or Allied. If it fit the cold rifle, you used it. 48 hours of that. Just 48 hours. But by the end, 35% of the division was just gone, wiped out. Men who'd crossed half of Europe just to get one shot at the guys who ruined their country. They were using bayonets when the bullets ran out. Think about that. The weight of that steel in your hand. Knowing if you miss, well, it's over. It reminds me of a drill sergeant I had back in the States, always yelling about holding the line. But he never had to do it with an empty M1 and 1,000 angry Germans coming up the slope. The heat it was stifling. Sweat stinging your eyes, blurring the sight of the cold rifle. Then, 7:20 in the evening, down in the village of Chambois, the air sort of changes. A Polish officer, dusty, half-deaf from the noise, he sees something moving, olive drab, not gray. He walks out into the square, slow, heavy boots on the cobblestones. And there's this American lieutenant from the 90th. They don't say much, can't imagine they could even hear each other. They just shake hands, hard. A photographer caught it at the time. No one noticed it was the moment the war changed. The trap was finally shut, locked, no more running. But back on Hill 262, the silence after the shooting stops, that's the thing that gets you. It's louder than the explosions. You look around and see the price, the real price, not the one Patton's going to write about later. You see the hands of the boys who didn't make it, reaching for nothing in the dirt, just a handshake in a ruined square and a hill covered in the dead. August 23rd, Normandy's supposed to be beautiful this time of year, but the air was thick enough to chew. General Eisenhower's riding in the back of an open-top car, his face wrapped in a wet handkerchief, but it don't help much. He's driving through what the boys are already calling the corridor of death. 2 miles, just 2 miles, of absolute carnage. Everywhere you look, there's iron and bone. 3,000 German vehicles, tanks with their turrets blown off, trucks burnt down to the rims, just sitting there. You could walk for hundreds of yards, Eisenhower wrote this down later, without ever touching the ground. You'd just be stepping on dead horses and men. The horses, that's the thing that sticks with you. 5,000 of them, rotting in the August sun. They didn't have engines, poor bastards, just pulling wagons until the shells started falling. The smell, it gets in your hair, stays in your clothes. Medic teams are moving through the wreckage, slow, looking for anyone still breathing. Most of them ain't. 10,000 Germans lying in the wheat, another 50,000 being marched off to cages. But look at the numbers. Really look at them. The Canadians took 5,500 casualties. The Poles, 1 in 3 of them fell. On that hill. It's a killing field, plain and simple. Reminds me of the slaughterhouses back home. Only the floor's made of French dirt. Ike's seeing the price paid by the North. The sacrifice Patton's report sort of, glossed over. You see a boot sticking out from under a charred panzer, a wedding ring on a hand that's turned gray. It didn't seem important then. The paperwork and the glory, not when you're looking at a valley of the dead. Eisenhower just sits there, quiet, observing the flies. History's being written right here, in the mud. And the stench, long before it ever reaches a printing press in D.C. A lone helmet sits on a fence post, swaying in the hot wind. Back at headquarters, the maps are clean, but the air's thick with something else. Ego. Patton's sitting there, ivory-handled pistols and all, writing his own version of the war. He's telling anyone who'll listen that his Third Army closed the trap. He's talking about American speed, American guts. But he barely mentions the boys from the North. Not a word about the Canadians clawing through the Hitler Youth. Not a peep about the Poles on that ridge. It's like they weren't even there. It makes my blood boil, sort of. Down at the 1st Canadian Army, General Harry Crerar. He's past being polite. He's livid. He sits down on the 22nd and hammers out a letter to Montgomery. You can almost feel the paper shaking in his hands. He says the Canadians wrote a page in history at Falaise, and he's going to make sure people actually read it. He ain't looking for medals he didn't earn, but he won't stand for undeserved obscurity either. That's a hell of a phrase, ain't it? Obscurity. It means being forgotten while someone else takes your beau. Patton? He's in his diary complaining. Says he was held back at Argentan, just to let the British have some glory. He didn't mention his tanks were running out of fuel, or that his lines were stretched thin as a wire. He just saw a finish line, and someone told him to stop. Now, Ike, he's got the hardest job of all, managing these giants. These massive egos. The American press, they love Georgie. They want a hero for the folks back home. It's easier to sell a story about one brave general than a messy coalition of Canadians and Poles and Brits. So the newspapers, they run with Patton's version. They print the maps showing the Third Army sweeping in, and they leave out the part where the Canadians took 5,000 casualties just to nudge the door shut. It didn't seem important then, to the guys in the newsrooms. But it mattered to the men in the dirt. Funny how the truth gets buried under a loud voice. You got boys who died in a wheat field, and their sacrifice is being traded for a better headline in New York. It reminds me of the old saying, about how the first casualty of war is the truth. Only this time, the truth was being strangled by a man who was supposed to be on our side. Back then, we didn't think much of the politics, we just knew who was doing the dying. But Crerar, he knew. He knew that if you don't fight for your place in the story, you just disappear. A fountain pen sits on a desk, leaking black ink over a map, slowly covering up the names of the towns where the real fighting happened. It's over now, sort of. The dust in Normandy is finally settling, clinging to the leaves of the apple trees like a gray shroud. Paris is open. The road to the Rhine is clear. But there's this bitter taste left behind. Not the metallic tang of fear. No, this is different. It's the taste of a story being twisted before the bodies are even cold. We closed the pocket, shattered Group B. But the Alliance, it took a hit too. Those Polish boys, General Maxek's men, they didn't fight for a mention in Patton's memoirs. They fought because they had no home to go back to, not yet. And the Canadians? They didn't bleed in those wheat fields for a cover story in Time magazine. They did the heavy lifting, the dirty, the grimy, the unglamorous work of holding the North, while the world looked south toward the ivory pistols. Funny how small things stick with you, like the way a name gets left off a map. Back then, we didn't think much of it. We just wanted to go home. But looking back, you realize that history isn't always what happened in the mud. It's what someone decided to tell the folks in the sunlight. Those boys at Hill 262, the ones who ran out of bullets and started throwing stones, they're the real legacy of Falaise. Not the generals, not the reports, not the ego. It's the silence of the corridor of death that tells the true story. Lich Sioux. History. It's written by the ones with the loudest voices. But the truth? The truth always stays right there, buried under the dirt in those French fields. A single, tattered Polish flag fluttering from a snapped tank antenna in the wind.